Incredibly good. I think the president has now seriously embarrassed me. Under your leadership, the university is doing really well, and the partnerships you're putting in place have really made a difference. This afternoon, we announced a $500,000 grant to the Inclusive Innovation Conference for precisely the reasons that the president outlined, with my good friend Eric Brynjolfsson, who's here as well, and many of his colleagues. What I wanted to do is spend a few minutes talking about what I think I need you guys to do, right? And then maybe Danielle and I can sort of have a chat about everything. My history with MIT starts from admiration. The original computer science lab, Dertuzis, the Lincoln Labs, all of that. When I was 20, these impossibly amazing, talented people, who, by the way, were in their 30s, were my heroes. And I remember thinking, if I could only just be as good as them, if I could only visit MIT and work on those issues and so forth. And so your role in shaping the universe in computer science, today, extraordinary commitment at the university level, is not just true now, it's been true for my entire adult life since I was a teenager. So I say that with great humility. And you've made a lot of strides. We were talking earlier, 48% female, 35% of undergraduates, computer science majors. These are extraordinary achievements, right, for the future, and they bode very, very well for where we're going to happen. I was looking for machine learning and big data examples that were interesting to sort of kick it off. A cucumber farmer in Japan wanted to relieve his aging mother from sorting cucumbers by hand. They used TensorFlow and trained it up, right? Pretty good, especially if you're the mom. We built a system where the machine learning listens to the piano music that you play and then finishes your song for you. Pretty neat. And by the way, it does a really good job. Google researchers working with doctors can find breast cancer tumors, and the imaging and the analysis is such that the best results occur in combination with very, very well-trained doctors, very well-trained neural networks. YouTube used machine learning to closed caption over 1 billion videos, right? Something that no human could do at our scale, into 10 different languages. We built a satellite tool that uses imaging around the globe to detect overfishing and give people tools to monitor and overdo that. Conservationists in Australia are doing the same thing, conserving sea mammals. We did a study of gender bias in movies by having automatic labeling of men and women speaking, and shockingly, to all the men anyway, men were doing 2/3 of the talking and women were doing 1/3. Another example of a subtle bias that we all deal with. Over and over again, we see these beginning to have an impact. So what I wanted to do is to say that I think that we've gone from an age of abundance and a world where we sort of have a lot of things, including obesity and too much information sometimes, and strange actors and conflict and so forth. I think we're entering a new world that's going to be vastly more powerful. And I'm going to call it the age of information, right? Age of information and intelligence. And the reason I say this is that when you apply information in the form of big data and the kind of intelligence I'm talking about, it will be possible to build systems that are transformative at a scale that we've only wanted to. The reason this is so important for you all is that this will become your career, right? As you enter the job market or in the job market, the decisions you make over the next 10 years will make the difference. When I was a young programmer, I was hired into Xerox PARC. I had no idea, but I worked with the people who actually built the networks that you use today, right? But it was incredibly important that I be in the right place, and I thank those people for making that possible. You're in the same place where you're going to get inserted into those positions, and if you get inserted into the right ones, the rest of it is going to be extraordinarily good. So let's take a look at where we are with this technology today. Self-driving cars, right? Computer vision is better than human vision. Why would you have people driving cars? The computer should be driving cars for many reasons, including the fact that the computer does not get drunk, right? Makes perfect sense. Plus, the computer can have eyes in the back as well as the forward of the car and so forth and so on. So one way to predict it is not just self-driving cars, but the technologies that are being built here and elsewhere will be used in all forms of automation in many, many different ways, whether it's new braking systems, new autopilots, and so forth and so on, as well as full self-driving. And I'm convinced that 50 years from now, in this room, the equivalent of this room, there will be a movie shown, and some handsome young actor will get in and out of the car and drive, and the people will laugh. Because they'll say, what an archaic idea to take such a handsome man and let him drive a car, right? And you laugh today, but I'm sure that 50 years from now this will be true. Because they'll say, oh, those people were so dumb. Let the computer do the work. Now, energy, right? MIT has this amazing energy project. I don't know if you've been able to follow it. I studied this extensively, and the modeling is fantastic. We've done our part. So Google has, we claim, the world's best data centers, and our reinforcement learning team went in and modeled the sources and uses of data centers, and they achieved a 15% improvement in energy use of the world's best tuned data centers. I, of course, went to the engineers and said, you guys thought you were so good, huh? But the important point is that these systems are capable of detecting patterns that even the most talented, smartest, best of any of you or us can detect. Now, what's 15% improvement worth in an energy distribution market? 5 times of their profits. Think of the carbon loading impact and so forth and so on. Let's think about food production and so forth. All sorts of people are now figuring out ways to do indoor warehouse-based plant growing, right, using very complicated machine learning models where they can actually figure out how to optimally grow. Now, why would you say, well, I'd rather have plants grown outside? Well, maybe you would, but maybe you don't want the pesticides that go with that. So all of a sudden, there's a new industry. And you can do this for crop rotations and so forth and so on. Healthcare. The hospitals have an enormous amount of data about what's going on, which is inaccessible to anyone except themselves. Right? These techniques allow you to take all that information, sum it all together, and actually produce outcomes. So when you go to the hospital, it'll basically say, you're in trouble or you're not. And what the doctor wants to know is, do they need to triage you right now? Or are you going to be around for the next 6 to 12 hours, right, while they deal with the other person, right? Perfectly reasonable decision on the hospital system. These systems are very good at predicting the next number from a series of numbers, which turns out to be very good for health information. And with enough signals, that's happening. There are people doing EHR work right now. And this is true at every level, right, because we're all the same, right? Hospital procedures can be improved. These can all be improved. And for the same reason you can improve the data center, you can improve the hospital and your outcome. Medical diagnostics, right? Medical imaging, pathology, all of those. If computer vision is better than humans, we should be using computers to assist us in making those decisions. It doesn't mean the doctor's job goes away. It means the doctor gets more accurate. So you say, well, why are you dumping on doctors? Right? After all, they're highly trained. Well, we can beat both dermatologists and ophthalmologists at what they do, even though we know nothing about either, because we see more skin and more eyes. We literally have more training data. We have an unfair advantage, right? That's why our products ultimately are better than the human equivalent and are combined with human to produce a better outcome. Education. Plenty of examples in education, but the ultimate end state is taking the signals and learning about how learning is best done, the learning about learning, if you will, applied to you can produce an individual lesson plan. In the same sense that if we take your diagnostic health and all the monitoring and so forth, we can produce an individual health plan. Literally, think of it as producing a shake in the morning that's unique to you, that if you drink this and it doesn't taste too bad, it will make you live longer, right? That's the prospect of personalization from these technologies. Communication, we're very close to, folks in this audience would know about Douglas Adams and the notion of the device, in fact, the fish, the babblefish you'd put in your ear that could allow you to talk to all other mammals and fish and so forth in their native language. Well, we can't quite do that for fish and other mammals, but we can do it for human languages. And we're at the point now where we can do language-to-language translation in real time, pretty close to human. You don't think that's going to have a big impact? Just wait when you actually talk to these people rather than just yelling at each other through a translator. Who knows what the implications of that are? And by the way, the same reason that works is the same reason all the pattern imaging work, because it's all numbers in these matrices. And this group, I don't need to tell you all about robots, right? You have them running around here in the basement. God knows what you're up to. Think about a healthcare robot, the future healthcare robot that's in a startup that one of you founds. That healthcare robot will learn. It will be trained from other experiences, and it will learn as it emerges into the home to take care of the elderly, because there's going to be lots of them, right? And they're going to learn as they go for the same reasons. Now, I do that as a preamble because that's not really what I wanted to talk about with you guys, right? I assert that this is solved, that these problems, this is just true, right? And we can debate that, right? Maybe you disagree. But there's lots and lots of evidence of each of the categories that I described that they are correct. I want to talk about what happens next. And I've become convinced that we've got a problem. I want to highlight 3 areas of research that I'd like you all to work on. The first is that as big as our computational resources are, I think we're going to need massive more computational resources to do some of the things that we want to do. Now, you sit there and you go, what drugs is he taking, right? I mean, the Moore's Law and the microprocessor revolution and GPUs and specialized processors and so forth is extraordinary. I went back to the college I went to, and the computer they're using now is 100 million times more powerful than the computer that I used, right? Pretty good. Well, from our perspective, not good enough. Like, what is your problem? Well, it turns out that the algorithms that are used here are essentially matrix multiplication and matrix logic of one kind or another over relatively sparse or small numbers of precision, if you will. This leads to specialized architectures. Because Moore's Law is slowing, which is something we can discuss in detail, we probably have some experts here, we need architectural approaches that will allow you to get another factor of 100 or 1,000 of computation in these models and or improvements in the underlying math models. Why do we need that? Because of the second thing. We want to get from the learning model that I've been describing, which is, by the way, incredible and driving the industry absolutely berserk, to a learn-to-learn model. There's a lot of evidence that these, what are called generative models, will allow you to begin to explore new networks. The simplest and perhaps inaccurate description is, build me a whole bunch of candidate neural networks and I'll see which one works best. It's not technically exactly how it works, but it's close enough. This might enable, for example, dreaming, right? I'm going to imagine, right, imagination. I'm going to imagine something and evaluate it and see if I like it, and then I'll try another one and another one. There's a lot of evidence that with the amounts of data we have and with a materially large amount of computational increase, you could begin to run these experiments and see if they work or not. And a lot of people think that with generative models, we can begin to solve the other problem, which is nobody but people at this level can understand any of the techniques that I described, right? This stuff is so bespoke, it's so difficult. So as an example, the AlphaGo, where we won 4-1 against the human, when you actually look at how they built AlphaGo, right, and the algorithms that they used, it required experts in Go, experts in computer science, and a whole bunch of math people, and it still took them 2 years. Right? That's not a scalable solution. So what we ultimately want is, here's some data, here's some training data, give me a model, solve the problem in a subroutine, in a SQL query, if you will. We're close to being able to do that. And then the final thing that I'd like you to work on is to understand what happens when that works. And then I'll finish up and ask for questions and comments and anything anybody cares about. I'd like to work on building a knowledge base of knowledge. If you go back to the history of the Library of Alexandria, which of course was burned down, ultimately mankind saw that having everything in one place was a pretty good idea. And because of the way training works, I'll use a simple example of a car. Your car over here learns how to turn left. Your car over here learns how to turn right. If we manage to make it so that both models be combined, we can build another car that can know how to turn left and right. By the way, that's something that humans can't do, right? So we can begin to accelerate learning by these common models. So what are the questions here? Where are the models? What is the data representation? How are they stored? How are they used? What do you do with them? These are open questions, but fundamental, in my view, to getting the advantage of the power of the combination of everything that I just described. So with that, thank you very much.
Eric, thank you for these inspirational words and for these very optimistic words about our field. Like you, I also believe that AI will change the world and is a vector for positive change. So I'd love to start our chat by talking a little bit about your background in computer science. And so I'm just curious, what got you interested in computer science? And was there a turning point as you moved in the field?
So in my case, I started programming when I was 14, but there was not a name for what I was. You know what I was. I was a nerd.
Well, we are all nerds. This is
I'm in friendly territory. And I didn't have a choice, because it's what I did. And there wasn't computer science at the time, so I had to go to college as an electrical engineer, but I focused on computer science. And the universities at the time were pretty flexible with such interests. Today, of course, there are computer science departments everywhere.
But was there a turning point that made you really know that this is your passion and this is how you will live your life? Or was that from the very beginning when you were 14?
One of my very close friends is Eric Lander, who's a brilliant geneticist at the Broad. And we were chatting about this one day, and he, of course, was a math expert and became a geneticist. And I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, when I was a teenager, I had this sense that if I were in my own space, my own work, I could make my own thing. I could define my own identity. The fact that I could do it as a young person was the thing that made me feel so good about myself. I'm paraphrasing. And I realized that was me too, right? It was that as a young man, right, as a teenager, when your identity's not so formed, the fact that I could sit there and build things on my own drove it. So that was the addiction. And I've always liked to build things as a result.
Well, I believe we all have superpowers because we know how to make things and then we can program them to make them work. So it's a pretty special place.
And one of the fun things if you're an engineer or computer scientist is you can convince people to make you into a businessman. So in my case, I was sort of a computer scientist and like to build things, did research and so forth. And then I thought it'd be interesting to build companies. And of course, don't you have to have a business degree to build companies? Well, apparently not. In fact, in some cases, some of the most successful founders don't even have college degrees. Mm-hmm. But the principles, my standard joke about computer science is there are only two concepts. One is replication, and the other one is one level of recursion. So if you think of companies are essentially architectural entities, right? Where you have to have the right level of balance between centralized control and replication and duplication. And I've spent the rest of my career after getting my degree building corporations that could scale. And I would argue that we're in a position where the platform that I'm describing now is the next great scalability platform. So if you imagine some variant of this library of Alexander that I was talking about, a platform of knowledge about everything, right? If you can't use that to make the world a better place, you're not paying attention.
So at MIT, we pride ourselves in training our students in the basics, but also giving them the opportunity to think independently, to work in research. You also had several research opportunities before you began your work with Google. Could you tell us what the role of research was in your career?
So my view of research was formed by Bell Labs and Xerox PARC. As a young, when I was at Princeton, I ended up, because I didn't really want to do what they wanted me to do. I wanted to do what I wanted to do. I started working at Bell Labs on Unix. Today, you know this as Linux. And I wrote Lex, which is sort of shocking that it's still in use today. And then I went to Xerox PARC, which was at the time the collection of the real gods of computer science. And it's a very interesting story how it all happened, but somehow they all ended up building the world that we have today. And I think their contribution cannot be overstated. And many of the things that you use today, for example, Steve Jobs visited Xerox PARC and learned about what ultimately became the Mac. So to me, when you can get these collections of people in one place with enough funding, they can make this happen. I'll give you another example. We bought a company called DeepMind, and DeepMind felt a little bit like Xerox PARC in the sense that it was this unusual collection of a particular kind of math skills that we're working on reinforcement learning, but it had the same feeling. I'm a helicopter pilot these days in my spare time, and I fly around New Jersey, and I fly right over Bell Labs as part of the route that I fly. And I look fondly at Bell Labs, which is clearly visible there. It's the same as it was when I was there as a young person. But the interesting thing from a helicopter is that you see that there are millions of houses around it. You go like, what an interesting observation. It shows you how rare these things are. So when you find one, run to it, was what I learned. That the skills and the specialty that were assembled at Bell Labs at the time, Xerox PARC at the time, and these are being created now, right? I would argue that the Broad is another example near here, and I'm sure there are many others.
So, Eric, there's so many different directions in which we can go. Let me ask you the following. So you wrote a book, How Google Works. Wonderful book. I've enjoyed it very much. In this book, you talk about the importance of long-term thinking. You say that short-term thinking can lead to stalls in your career, and that it's important to think in 5-year chunks. So where is AI 5 years from now, and what is Google doing to make sure that we push in that direction?
So that part of the book, it's called How Google Works, available in paperback, $10 or less. I hope you all enjoy it. You can afford it here. My observation about most business problems is that people can plan 12 to 18 months ahead, and that they can never really figure out what 5 years looks like. I'll give you an example, a critical example. When I was at Sun, which had a processor called Spark, and we had built a PC, which is in fact built here in the suburbs of Boston, Route 128, and there was this discussion where it was concluded that we could not get our margin structure down to the PC industry. And I was not smart enough to say, oh my God. It was a big fight, and I left the room. But think about it. At that moment, if you'd said, let's extrapolate forward what will happen if that remains true to our company. So what I learned was, phrase the question, if this trend continues, what does 5 years look like from now? 5 years ago, I predicted that there were a number of companies that would compete with each other in platform strategies. At the time, there were 4, now there are 5. And that they would play a significant role in establishing the digital agenda. They were, of course, Apple, Amazon, Google, and Facebook, right? If you go look at valuations and roles today, you can see now there's a 5th one. Microsoft's got its act together again, so really 5. They're called, by the way, MAAF, M-A-A-A-F, which is a pseudonym for math, just so we're clear. So going back to AI, a lot depends on the rate at which you think the core discoveries will continue. We're in a period of such rapid discovery, it's hard to know what the slope of that is. But it's literally every day there's a new insight, and they're addressing issues. So for example, there are attributive models in AI which appear to be able to explain how the neural network learned something. And that would help address one of the core questions, which is the network cannot explain why it knows something, and therefore if it's wrong, you can't correct it, right, from a training perspective. DeepMind has done a great deal of work on memory, and so that it's possible now, for example, as a research mechanism, to actually store some memory in an intermediate state in your learning model as you go forward. These are fundamental discoveries of computer science that I think will determine the rate of growth. It seems to me that the limit of what we're describing, so another way of asking the question, so I can't answer your question properly, is to say, what are its limits? And the answer is, the limits are people who are skilled enough to navigate the complex solution space. We have done the following. We have, 20,000, 30,000 engineers of this category. We've taken more than half of them and put them through sort of fast AI training, learning these models. Right? That's how crucial it is to our business, and you see that in our growth and approaches. And I give you example after example through throughout the Google empire of choices and products of what we're doing. We're also trying to convince physicists and mathematicians to switch over to sort of our tribe for this because of the leverage that they can have. But whether it's looking at evil comments on YouTube comments, whether it's in the ad system and ad targeting, whether it's improving search, a core part of what we're doing, the scale flow through for a large business with a great deal of information is profound.
So you mentioned DeepMind and some of the things you are doing at Google. You are also collaborating with many universities. And I wonder what your view is on the role of industry research laboratories and academic research to move the field forward. How do you view the role of Google and the role of a place like MIT?
So in the politics with Larry and Sergey and me, I for years, because I had done so, I owed so much and spent so much time at Bell Labs and Xerox, I wanted to actually fund, and we had enough money we could fund this, create one of these things. And as usual, they disagreed over this, thinking that that was an old idea and that there would be two new ideas. So the first new idea was that we would fund universities directly, because universities are good at this stuff, right? And you all are very good at it. It's why we're such a large grantor to MIT and to the other sort of leading technical universities. And the other idea was to create what was called Google X and is now X. And the argument goes something like this. The original formulation was atoms, not bits. So we had Google, which was doing bits, and instead we were going to work on atoms. And curiously, the first thing that they did was invent something called Google Brain, which is at the center of our bits, right? So much for being in charge of anything. But nevertheless, the idea was that we had a strong leader, and we would bring in entrepreneurial faculty members, scientists, and so forth, and we would say to them that they had to work on a problem that was a 10-year problem that would affect 1 billion people, and that where in the 10-year period we could make a 10 times improvement of whatever the problem was. So that's sort of the space. And the Venn diagram overlap was pretty small. And they created a rapid evaluation group which would try different ideas. And most of the ideas, most of whom I liked, they rejected because they didn't work or they didn't meet one of those criteria. So Google today has become Alphabet because Google X keeps spawning these things, right? Including the self-driving cars, including Verily, which is the healthcare startup. And I think the model will continue.
So can you share with us some of the ideas that you're still working on with this 10-year time horizon and some ideas that were rejected?
There was an idea to do flat panels that were seamless and that would self-configure, which I thought was really cool. And they couldn't get it to work. There was another idea involving an energy cycle where they could use sunshine and desalinate water essentially and turn it into essentially methane. And again, they didn't pan out. And there are hundreds of such ideas that they propose. And not unlike here, I suspect many of you and many of the faculty members here are constantly saying, well, did we try this one before, or do we have a new idea? You know, you want to ask a question, what's new, right? What's new in this space? And by the way, I should say that the sort of religious argument is our invention is largely self-driven because of what the technological capabilities that people like you all bring to us. But it would be much better if we could list the great problems of humanity and try to solve those. We've not quite figured out how to match sort of the sort of strategic statement of we have this problem. So figure out, for example, the income inequality issues, mistreatment of society, all the things that we care a lot about as humans. We've not yet figured out ways in Google X anyway to build products that would address those, although they may be coming.
So what are some of the ideas, the long-term ideas that Google is working on that we haven't heard about yet and that you can tell us about?
I think that we're still fundamentally in the get everybody wired and make everybody smarter map. If you think about Google today, Google makes you smarter, but you still have to ask it questions. Wouldn't you rather have it anticipate your needs with your permission and all of that to actually help you? So the sort of core vision that so today I use Gmail, and it suggests replies to my mail messages. And inevitably it says, that's cool. So I've adopted this as my vernacular. And all of a sudden, I'm cool again, right? So the man-machine symbiosis has improved my social life. So trying to sort of work on that is probably where the biggest value is. Larry talks about moving from search to suggest, right? That we, instead of searching, we make suggestions that are appropriate. Many people believe that in the next 5 years, we'll have a very good personal assistant. And a personal assistant, by that I mean a thing, I guess is the way to say it, not a person, but somebody like what an administrative professional would be like. Somebody who says, well, Eric, here you are in Boston, and there's a movie showing tonight, but you don't really like that kind of movie, and your friends are having dinner over here, but you had a fight with that friend, and you really need to go do this work thing, so we're scheduling you for that. And you sit there and you go, would you use that product? Yeah, you would, because you're overwhelmed with choices. No, Butler is saying no. So people are saying basically, you wouldn't do that. But most people's lives are incredibly time constrained, right? And they're just overwhelmed by all of these choices. So I'd like an assistant that had good judgment that could help me focus my time.
Is Google aiming to become a neuroprosthetic company where we all have a Google chip in our brain? And
So we actually talked about that once. And I couldn't tell if it was a joke or not. So let me give you a sort of speculation on the future of how could such a thing occur. We're not working on it today, and we don't currently have any plans on it. There are people who have brain injuries of one kind or another, whether it's an illness or an accident or something and so forth. Don't you think that as a result of the brain initiative and research that's going on around in our country and around the world, that we will eventually get enough knowledge, a combination of AI techniques and new techniques yet to be invented, that it will be possible to make these people's lives better? So that's probably how it would start, right? We're not doing that today.
so I'd like to turn the conversation back to the relation between academia and industry, between MIT and Google. We are a tremendous source of talent
Thank you very
for
much.
you.
That's why I'm here.
But in the recent past, there have been challenges in our country with respect to H-1B visas and retaining the talent we train. What is Google doing to help with this problem?
Well, I spent the last 20 years announcing that the single stupidest policy in entire America was the limit on H-1B visas. I have recently been trumped by the following scenario, where you take the highly legal and highly effective technical people from 7 countries and you trap them outside the country, right? Until you can keep them trapped at the equivalent of JFK until our lawyers can spring them out. So I think my view is clear. So a more serious argument is a properly run company, and certainly a tech company, is really about having the best people in the world. So I want to say to you right now, we want the best people in the world, regardless of any form of sex, race, what have you. We want and country and all that language. We want them, and they want them to work for us and not our competitors, right? It's easy to understand. We want 100 market share of all those people. So we should organize our company to be the most attractive place for such people to do. And so stupid government policies that restrict us from getting those people and getting a fair chance at employing them are antithetical to our mission, the things we serve, and also it causes our earnings to be lower and we pay fewer taxes. So there. Right?
So
I'm not even making the moral argument, which I think is pretty obvious. So I can go on, but I'd be wasting your time because we all agree.
All right, so I have a question for the audience. Please raise your hand if you're a computer science major.
Excellent.
Okay, Eric, lots of computer science majors
This
here.
is more computer scientists than there were when I started being a computer scientist.
So Eric, what is your advice and answer to our wonderful computer science students who will be entering the workforce and will be changing the world 10, 20 years from now? What should they know?
Well, the first place, if I integrate across a number of things, you know far more now than I knew at the same point because the industry has moved forward. So one of the reasons that we're doing better is I'm not in charge anymore, right? That the executives that we trained and I trained are quicker and better because they grew up inside of that management culture. So we do a much better job, for example, of building software teams, testing software, managing the software development than I did when I was doing the same thing, because we were busy inventing it, but now it was settled law, if you will. So one way to understand it is you want to put yourself at a point when there's an emerging phenomena where you're one of the pioneers. And in my case, it was mini computers, open systems, Unix, distributed networks. My PhD was on software development and so forth. These were new concepts at the time. So you as scientists and future scientists should identify those areas and run at them as hard as you can. There's nothing more exciting than the feeling of inventing something new. And that feeling of doing it with a team and that sort of sense of getting up and just running to it, right? You can't stop. It's what you want to do. It's binding to you is so powerful. It is your identity. You forget to eat and sleep, right? And your friends are all doing it, and you work Saturdays and Sundays and so forth because it's this unique opportunity. Those are the most precious times of your life. And if you can make that continuous, then you have one heck of a life, right? And the nature of scale of what we do as computer scientists allows you to do that. And I'm arguing that the techniques and things that I've been talking about, and I asked that I could speak at the beginning about the next challenges, because I want you to run there, right? I want you to figure out new algorithms, new technical approaches, new hardware architectures that enable this. And the beauty of that as advice is everything else gets taken care of. Because when you're in the right spot, all the luck happens to you, right? When I graduated, there was an article that said that there were too many engineers in the world and in the United States, and there weren't going to be jobs for engineers. But I, being committed, decided to carry on, even though I had very poor employment choices, according to this article. And I remember this. I remember discussing it with my family. And they said, well, you know, do what you want. You do anything anyway you want anyway, right? And I think if you do this right, then the rest of it takes care of it. You know, luck is path dependent, but the first set of paths involve hanging out with the right people. And because you're here, you already are. This is your tribe, if you will. You already know them. The people, and if they're not these people, they're very similar to these people.
So you mentioned jobs. AI, technology, and jobs is a very hot topic, and there is a lot of negative reporting about our work on jobs. Now, I happen to be a very big optimist, and I happen to believe that there isn't enough AI. We really need way more. But I heard you read a very profound comment about AI and jobs from John Kennedy. So I'm going to steal that from you. So if men have the talent to invent new machines that put men out of work, they have the talent to put those men back to work. I wonder if you could share with us your thoughts on AI and jobs.
That quote was 1962. So the problem has been around for a while. In fact, the problem is in one form been around for a couple hundred years. I've taken the position of just job elimination denier, right? That's the position I'm now taking. I've decided that I'm just going to be contrarian because I think the data supports me and it's more fun to be in opposition to this view anyway. And nobody really knows. I'll give you the arguments. So the first place is, what are we doing? We're making people smarter, and we're in a declining cost industry. So in general, people should be able to use these tools of any level of motivation, education, intelligence, what have you. The second thing that's happening is that globally there is a problem of demographics where you need to, and Eric will keep me correct on all the math here, that the percentage of people who are productive compared to the people who are unproductive economically, that is so-called the dependency ratio, is getting worse, especially in Europe, the United States, China, and Japan, and also Korea. It's basically because people are living longer, which is, by the way, a good thing, right? So how are you going to make productivity rise in countries where the dependency ratio is getting off? You're going to have to make those people more productive. So I'm going to start by the argument that you have no choice, right, as a society, as to work hard to deploy these solutions as quickly as you can. That's my first argument. My second argument is there's no question that there's job dislocation. And I'm not in any way denying that. But there's always new solutions. And the economic folks will say that you can see the job that's lost, but you very seldom can see the job that's created. So let's give an example of, let's imagine a scenario where California allows a 80,000-pound truck to be driven down Highway 5 with no person in it. You can decide the odds of that law being passed. But let's say it actually happens. There's no question that driver, and this is an important job, is missing. Could there be other jobs created by virtue of the loss of that job? Yeah, they could be, because the truck can have higher utilization, right? And there are other functions that the humans can do, including scheduling, understanding, and so forth. The pie gets bigger. So I'm going to take a position, because nobody really knows the answer, that this time is not different, that while there's a tremendous dislocation in jobs, and I'm not denying that, in aggregate there will be more jobs. My third point is I do believe we have a very significant forward problem on income inequality. And I think, again, I'll defer to the experts here at MIT, but it seems to me that there are economic winners and that the gap between the winners and the sort of, so we say service workers is getting larger. This is a subject of great political discussion. I've not heard good answers from politicians on either side. And I think it gets worse for reasons that are pretty obvious. If you're in an information age, who are the winners? Well, the people who have the information, people in this room, people who can manipulate it and so forth. Well, the people who, for whatever reason, are not able to do that, they're not going to get the kind of gains. And then the next question there is, what do you do about that? And there's a long list of things that you can do, including redistribution and so forth. But I'd rather go for the aggregate economic growth, the investment in productivity, and then deal with that as a secondary effect.
So I'm sure the audience is dying to ask you questions, but I will abuse my position to ask one last question. And I'm curious if you can give us some details about your self-driving car effort. And in particular, you said that you expect your cars to be in use in 1 to 2 years. What are the priorities for that effort, and how do you go about ensuring that the autonomous cars get well integrated with human-driven cars?
So, and I know there's research here, so there are experts in the room. I don't think I understood quite how big an event this is, so let me see if I can say it right. The first thing to understand is that there are 33,000 to 34,000 people who will die on American highways this year, and there's 25,000 or so still going to die. And we need to start with that in many cases, these are terrible tragedies. These are people at the height of their lives, often young people with great potential. Life is extinguished. That's just not okay. That's point one. I think the second point is that there are many, many, many issues to be resolved around liability. My standard joke of this is that you have a self-driving car, and I'm in it, and the car has been trained, and as part of its training, it learned to do the rolling stop. Okay, so it didn't stop right. So the policeman comes over, and the car knows to stop when the policeman approaches it, and the policeman says to me, Eric, Mr. Schmidt, you have I'm going to write you a ticket, you've just rolled this through the stop sign, and I'll say, officer, I did not do it. And he's going to say to him, what kind of a policeman do you think I am? Now the car is listening, and the car says, officer, I did it. And the policeman says, takes a moment and says, why? And the car correctly says, I don't know. Right? Okay, so now the policeman's going to give a ticket to somebody. Okay, so who are its choices? The idiot car or the idiot driver? Me, right? So you see my point. We have to, and there's lots and lots of issues like that, whether they're liability or so forth. What we've done is we've created a subsidiary called Waymo. We've done a partnership with Fiat. Last week, we announced that we'd purchased 500 more of these cars. They have a laser on top of them, so they have an eye that's better than a human eye. It's incredible. And it's fun to get in the car, and we have a way of seeing what the laser sees, and has it watch thing. I was in it, and the car turns left, and there is a mother and a child, and the mother and child are walking across the street. And I go, oh my God, we're going to run over a mother and a child, and it's going to be front page news. We're going to do some damage to these people, and I'm in the car. And the car stops. And I go, whatever, okay. Because it's that good. So the good news is the technology works. So we've now started a program which is called the Friends and Family Program, where in Arizona, because we're doing the testing because state laws allow this in Arizona, where we have a set of people and cars that are servicing the needs of these lucky families 24 hours a day, because we're trying to understand how they in fact use cars as opposed to theoretically, and make sure that we can cover all their needs. And then we'll see. So think of that as an initial beta program. But the technology works. There's lots of things to work out, and this will be coming soon from us and from our competitors.
So how many cars in the study? 500?
We announced we've purchased 500. And you'll see them if you're in California or in Chandler, Arizona. You'll actually see them because you'll recognize the laser on top.
So I would like to open the floor for questions to you guys. If you'd like to ask Eric a question, we have microphones on both sides. Please state your name and ask your question. So let's go on this side.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schmidt, for talking. You mentioned some
Your name first?
Oh, yeah, I'm Drew Bent. I'm an undergrad here in physics and computer science. You mentioned some problems just generally with government and how that creates problems for engineers and Google. And this is another problem. How would you apply machine learning and MIT engineers? Or what do you recommend for everyone in this room to solve these types of problems in government?
I think in order to solve a problem, there has to be a willingness to solve the problem. And a lot of the political systems are organized around a set of interests that don't fundamentally want to change. So just remember that government waste is somebody's profit. And so I think it takes an awareness that it's time. I do military consulting working for the Defense Department, and there's a case where people have finally gotten tired of the inefficiency and waste of what is an important activity, which is defending the country. But I think what happens in government is that there's a certain point of, it becomes intolerant. We may have seen that, by the way, with the misinformation campaigns that went on in the 2016 election. In other words, people may say that enough is enough, right? That the consequences to the country and to our psyche were too great, and that those problems will get fixed. But what I think the problem, there are many, many candidates for having engineers fix politics, and inevitably engineers don't understand politics very well.
All right, let's go to this side.
Hi, my name is Blake Elias. I'm a computer scientist here. So when you mentioned the personal assistant, I got pretty worried about this, and I've been worried about this for a while because it's nice to have tools that can do these sorts of things, and I certainly want a tool that can help me be smarter. What I don't want are tools that track me, that report what I'm doing to Big Brother, and that fundamentally destroy our democracy because you can't have your own privacy. You don't have control over your data. And so in effect, you can't do anything without Big Brother knowing about it, without whether it's Google, whether it's the government. And this poses a problem if you can't have anonymity behind your actions. The state can shut down people who it doesn't like, and that's a problem. So how would you propose that anyone who's smart, who wants to protect themselves from being tracked like this and wants to have control of their own data and their own computation, how would you suggest that individuals make that possible, and how would you suggest that large organizations make that possible for people?
First place, I would use anonymous browsing in Chrome.
But the assistant who knows you, right, who's going to know you personally?
It's very important for me to state right up front that these need to be opt-in choices. So there's always a trade-off of these kinds of solutions. If we know more about you, then in theory, a FISA court could order us to give that to the government if you're a suspected terrorist. And that's the law. We have to comply with it. So my first advice would be, in situations where you have a genuine secret, I would use anonymous browsing because we really don't retain that stuff. With respect to assistants, it's unreasonable, I think, to expect corporations to build completely closed systems because the government won't allow us to. The government won't allow us to build a system that we can't, at some level, serve against a FISA court order. And we've fought this over and over with the government. And that's a political matter for you to lobby with the government. And I think with the rise of concern over terrorism and so forth, we're not going to go back to a no FISA court arc, would be my guess. I think it's just too much of the other side winning. I went, as part of my work in the White House, I worked very hard to get some of the Snowden revelations and the Section 215 stuff stopped, right? Meetings with the president and so forth and so on, precisely for this reason. So I'm not sure what to say to you about corporations in this with respect to privacy, because at some level we are regulated by law.
Do you see whether the tools could be at least distributed? We can move on.
Sure. And in fact, one of the most important things to know is that we as a community build very, very powerful open source tools that include incredibly powerful encryption. And one of the things that bedevils the government is that they can't break the encryption and they want backdoors. And we say over and over again, no backdoors, no backdoors, no backdoors, because we can't ensure that only the good guys come in through the back door. And that argument's working so far.
Thank you. Let's go to the side.
Right. Yeah, hi, I'm Gil Altrovitz, MIT alum. I had a question about kind of maybe any lessons that you learned from, as you said, there are a number of ideas that you guys have explored, and sometimes you'll take one further and sometimes maybe not. So one of them, for example, I'm thinking about Google Health or Boston Dynamics. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about either lessons learned or some of the, how you approach items like that when you have different ideas and exploring that.
Well, we've had a set of initiatives. Part of any good technology business is the ability to fail quickly. And all of my regrets have been that I didn't terminate a bad idea soon enough, or I shouldn't have had it in the first place. If you go back to Google Health, which is more than a decade ago, we wanted to consumerize, whatever the term is, personal healthcare data that you could control. And we did not fully understand how much of a lock the existing healthcare providers had and how closed that data was. To me, that is a national crisis, because now today you have a number of providers who are keeping the data closed. There is an initiative, by the way, to use the HIPAA laws to open that up and force you to be able to do it. But at the time, we didn't have those laws, we didn't know how to use them, and so forth. So the product didn't really work very well. We did a product called Wave that similarly was either before its time or didn't work, your choice. And it was a commingling of email and instant messaging in a clever way, but it didn't scale because it didn't interoperate enough. In hindsight, I think we could have seen that, but we just weren't paying enough attention. So I think the basic principles are, it's easier if I say how I would build a fantastic product today. I would use Android and the iPhone as my communications mechanism. Android, by the way, is more popular than iPhone, so we're clear. I would use a fast network, and I would use powerful cloud computing, and I would use the Google Cloud system. So we're clear. And I would use machine learning, right? And I would have users contribute data in with tagging and their knowledge. I would use machine learning to come up with an interesting solution, and I would sell it back to those users as a value-added service. I think that model that I just described is a replicable model for startups and for new web-based services, because people have phones, the information's open, the AI stuff is available, the TensorFlow is free and widely used, the computing power is coming, and that's a startup idea second, I think.
All right.
Hi, I'm Chandler Squires. I'm an undergrad in comp sci and electrical engineering. So as tech giants like Google and the 4 others you mentioned grow larger and larger and have more potential for impact on the world, more so than most nations, how do we as consumers and as potential employees encourage those companies to hold themselves ethically accountable and guarantee that they continue to do so in the future?
I think that it happens naturally. First place, our employees are very loud on these matters. So if we were to violate the trust of our employees, we would hear from them in a very loud, very direct way. And in our case, for example, we took a position that was broadly viewed as positive within our employee base about China, because we didn't want to participate in their censorship. So that's an example where we made a decision on principle, not necessarily based on revenue. And companies face these things all the time. What I will tell you is that we're now in a space of information where our impact, broadly speaking, is significant. And if we don't get it right, we'll get regulated. And if you look at the controversies over, just using the most recent election, over Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and fake news and all that kind of stuff, every one of those teams is busy trying to fix these things. So what somebody thought was fake news and a false attribution, I would just say that's a bug. Fix it, right? Get it right. Don't allow somebody to misstate the source of something, right? These are systems that can be engineered to be accurate, right? And then go to fight the next battle.
So let's go to this side, take a couple more questions.
Hi, my name's Jeff Lipton. I'm a postdoc here. And it seems like you're interested in making us smarter, but it seems like we have a problem not with information flow, but with emotion flow, given that anger is the fastest emotion to travel over the internet. How do you believe we can improve emotion regulation via technology?
We're not in the emotion regulation business.
Self-emotion regulation.
Okay, so you're welcome to do that startup. We're not doing it. There are a set of surprises that in my career that are obvious when I think about them. One is the weaponization of cyberspace, and in particular the nation-state attacks, which we're all aware of. That was a surprise. I would not have predicted that, and I should have. Again, I was just wrong. Most people didn't predict it, and I was one of them that didn't predict it. Another one has been the Gresham's Law phenomena where bad speech drives out good speech. And my standard comment there is you use a stereotypical, you have a woman who is very thoughtful and she feels passionate about something and she writes something out on one of the social networks, and then she's immediately attacked as a woman in the most vile and degrading ways. And so she has lunch with her girlfriend and she said, well, I had no idea there were this many bad men in the world. Right? That's what she says to her girlfriend. And her girlfriend correctly says, it was bots, right? You were attacked by computers because of malicious, misleading initiatives, right? People trying to silence you. And that's another thing that was a big surprise. The latter can be detected, as the former can. And it seems to me that as an industry, one of the greatest priorities is to identify this, from my perspective, misuse of identity. I don't mind if you and I disagree, and I don't even mind if we disagree and I'm right and you're wrong and you're getting a lot of airplay about it. I do mind if someone is impersonating me or impersonating you and misstating you or me. I want to hear from you authentically. That's a problem that can be solved in computer science. It really can. And the AI techniques that we're building, we have a group called Jigsaw that's doing this around comments. I think this problem can get solved, and it needs to be solved.
Okay, two more questions, one on this side.
Hi, I'm Nate Foss. I'm an undergrad in here, computer science. How do you think quantum computing will play into the future of computing and AI, and how soon?
We don't know, and we don't know. We have a major program around D-Wave and a bunch of stuff, and we're increasing the number of qubits fairly quickly. There's great excitement that this will work, but we don't even know how many bits you need in order to fundamentally change computer science. It's clearly not the same number of bits in the normal CMOS world, right? That's not in question. But I think it's a very important active area of research. It's not ready yet to really know what to plan about it. Just continue to invest in the research.
Hi, I'm Allison, and I'm an undergraduate majoring in computer science. You said earlier that you were foreseeing that Google would move into an era of suggestion instead of search. However, I find that sometimes when I'm Googling things or when I'm searching for things, the results become rather catered to me and my personality, what I searched for in the past. So as you're moving forward into this, how do you kind of find the balance between opening people's horizons and suggesting what they want? So
this is generally known as the filter bias question. And the general answer is we want to give you the tools to decide where you are in that spectrum. So if you don't want to have any personalization at all, you can use incognito browsing, and literally you'll see the generic outcome. Most people prefer some level of personalization, where I am, aspects of my type, and so forth. We do try to use various techniques in AI to surface things that are interesting and surprising. So we are fighting against sort of the filter bubble implication of your question.
So I am sorry we are out of time, but I would like to invite all of you to a reception for Eric. Eric will be with us until 6:30, so a few more minutes. You can ask your questions then. I would like to thank you all for being here with us, and I would like to especially thank Eric for bringing this optimistic and futuristic view of AI and how we can change the world through AI. So please
Well,
join
thank you
me
all.
in thanking Eric.
Thank you.